Welcome to Kevin's Stories. This one's about how I got my cheekbone broken in a mugging in America and didn't have health care, but I was flying to England in a few days for grad school. So I just gutted it out and waited for that sweet NHS hookup. One American's fantastic experience with socialized healthcare. So the band I was in, Fat Mama, broke up in like 2000 and the end of 2000, I think. And I went back to undergrad, University of Colorado Boulder, to finish. But I was depressed about the band breaking up. I spiraled out of control, and I got mixed up with black tar heroin. And in the end, I finished my degree, but I basically went from being the golden boy to being the man with the golden arm, and had to move back to Michigan to try to get my shit together. And for a little while, I did, sort of, for like a month. I actually did, my addiction wasn't so bad that when I went clean, when I got back to Michigan, I was like vomiting and seeing babies like crawling on the ceiling or anything. But it was kind of bad. It was a mid-level, we'll call it a Midland heroin withdrawal. And I got clean for maybe a month, but anyone with a substance abuse problem will tell you that like the first time you get clean, it's basically just fodder for saying, see, what's the harm if I use? I can quit. I just did. And so I was clean for like a month and I started using again and just fucking running wild in Detroit along the Cass corridor. And man, I've got some stories about that, but I'll save those for another video. And then I bottomed out. And when I say bottomed out, it was stealing from my parents, check. Car taken away by the police, check. They slapped a cigarette out of my mouth. They yanked me out of my car, slapped a cigarette out of my mouth, and just seized my car out from underneath me with this like draconian law that has since been found to be unconstitutional according to Michigan's constitution. And I've been meaning to look into like if I have any sort of avenue for recompense, but ain't nobody got time for that. But I bottomed out, and that's when it all came crashing down, and I got into a methadone clinic and started going every morning with my mom. And I actually have really fond memories from that period. And my mom tells me she does too. It was every morning, the two of us going to the Victory Clinic in Jackson, Michigan. See, my parents had their own problems. They were retiring and had to downsize, and the dot-com bubble burst, they'd lost a bunch of money too. So they had to sell like their dream house on East Middle in Chelsea, Michigan, and buy a smaller house in Jackson, Michigan. And my dad's like never gotten over it. He still talks about the house on East Middle. But so we ended up in Jackson, and like the house was kind of awesome actually. But it was right on the edge of a rough area. A lot of Jackson at the time, I don't know if it is now, Jacktown people can let me know. A lot of Jackson was rough at that point. But theirs was like, if you went right, it was like, a nice neighborhood. And there's like butterflies and birds. And if you went left, it looked like, Grand Theft Auto Liberty City or something. But anyway, I started going to this Victory Clinic. And when I left, they told me I was basically like their only victory. And they kind of were like, yeah, you're the only one who's ever like stopped using it. But I started 100 milligrams. I tapered down slowly. And I needed a win at this point in my life. I needed a victory. And so my girlfriend at the time, Anna, who was British, was going to go back to school at University of London to finish. And I was like, I'm going to apply to grad school, And so I applied to grad schools in England. It was actually kind of cheaper. And I got into a few, and I chose University of Bristol in Bristol, England. And I'm so glad I did, because I loved it. It was one of the one of the great eras of my life was going to grad school at University of Bristol. But days before I went, well, a week and a half before I went, I got bike jacked because Jackson was a little rough. I was hanging out at the skate shop, and my bike, my freestyle bike, because I was also into freestyle biking, was inside the door, and this kid was just hanging out, like looking at stuff like me. I was like talking to the person working there, and on his way out, he just jumped on my bike and started riding. And speaking of, Grand Theft Auto, I've been playing too much of it around that time because in my head, I'm picturing me like I start chasing him and I'm like, I'm going to get up to him and I'm going to grab him and pull him off and be like, the name's Vassetti, or like run up and give him the elbow. And it didn't play out like that. I caught up to him and I grabbed him and he just spun and he like, bam, just swung his hand right into my face. And it didn't knock me down, but it like stunned me. And then he started riding and I started chasing him again. And then we did this like comical like movie scene where like he turned right into this parking lot, but it turned out there was some sort of event going on. So there's like all these people like standing around with drinks and he's like having to weave around them and everybody's getting in the way, And there's like people with a pane of glass and like, crates of watermelons. No, I'm just kidding. But there was all these people standing around with glasses and I'm like yelling like, that's my bike, And everyone's like, that might be, but I'm not going to get involved. And he got away. So my parents know about that. I didn't actually tell them about this next bit. I sort of left out some details. So when my problems with the face came up, they thought it was from the bike jacking, but it actually wasn't because I didn't want them to know that I got assaulted twice within a 2-week span in the new town that they moved to because I knew they'd feel really bad. My dad was already just grieving the loss of that house in Chelsea as it was. So like 3-4 days before I'm going to England, I'm just crossing this like vacant lot and I didn't even see it happen. Like 1 minute I'm like walking, like thinking about life. Next minute, I'm just like, why am I like looking at the sky? It's like I can't see, but I can hear voices. And then I wake up and it's like, I'm getting the full body massage from 3 guys who are like going through my pockets. And I stand up and they don't even run away because like they leveled me and they knew it. And there's 3 of them. But I start following them and just start hassling them like, yo, let me get my fucking ID. I'm flying in a few days. And it wasn't like they had my passport, but still, I mean, I figured I should have another form of ID. So they threw it back to me and someone had seen this happen apparently because the police came pretty fast. I only made it about a half a block and the police rolled up and they're like, did you just get mugged? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, give me a description. And I'm like, all right. And I describe him, and he's like, oh, I think those guys walked right in front of my car, and I have them on tape. Well, do you want to take a look and see if it's them? And I was like, yeah. And so I look, and I'm like, yep, there's the 3 guys. I remember one of them had a Penny Hardaway Orlando Magic jersey on. And so an ambulance rolls up, but I don't have health care, And so I refuse care. And the EMT is like, all right, Jesus Christ, let me at least check your eyes. And so he like looks in my eyes, and he's like, okay, stay up as late as you can tonight. Don't go to bed until you absolutely have to. And do not go home and take a nap, in case I had a concussion, which I probably did. Because I, got hit really hard from behind with possibly brass knuckles. I don't know. But anyway, it hurt pretty bad, but what was worse was I couldn't move my jaw side to side, so I knew something was wrong. But it didn't really hurt until kind of the next day, and then the day after that, it started to really hurt. But it was amplified by my coming down from methadone. But at this point, I'm just like, I have been looking forward to going to England. I have to go. This is the new era. I'm putting all this behind me. This is going to be my big win. And so I fly there in pain, taking ibuprofen and Tylenol together. And I meet my girlfriend Anna, picks me up at the airport. We spent a night at her dad's he had this amazing farmhouse that was built in like the 13th century, like literally. And it had a fire in one wing that had burned down like before America was even a country, that had been turned into a garden. It was like ridiculous. It was so beautiful. And then the next day I went to Bristol and I checked into this legendary like bed and breakfast on St. Michael's Hill that had like amazing, like unhealthy fried breakfast, and all the walls were painted cool, and the jukebox had like Big Star and the replacements. It was like a really, really awesome place. So I checked in there. I'm in pain. I can't eat. I can't move my jaw side to side. So like to eat, I had to like shake my head around. And then I do like Olympic level adulting, because there's a bunch of stuff. So I moved my stuff from there to a youth hostel because it was too expensive to stay there. And I don't know how long it was going to take me to find a place and whatever. So after a night there, I moved my stuff to a youth hostel, shared room, like 5 or 6 guys. It's like, hey, what's up? It's like, threw all my stuff in there. And then I go and like in one day, I'm like, bank account, HSBC. I get my first, was that my first cell phone? No, I feel like I had a Nokia on the Cricket plan or something before that, but got a cell phone. Got my student ID. Well, I had to get pictures to get my student ID. Just like hustle. Take care of it all. Finally, once it's all taken care of, I go to the hospital and I'm like, something's wrong with my face, And they x-ray it and they're like, yeah, your cheekbone's broken. Now, I'd like to point out that they didn't technically have to fix it, because your healthcare doesn't start until school starts, and school didn't start for another couple of weeks. So they could have refused to see me, but they let doctors make that call. Like, imagine that, right? Like a healthcare system where the doctors get to make decisions like that. And so they're like, what doctor is going to be like, no, sorry. So they did it. I went under the needle, like they put me under, had surgery, and I thought the healthcare was great. The one thing I noticed that was different was when I was in recovery, it was like one big room, like a World War II movie or something. But we're all in beds in like one big room. But I mean, I kind of appreciated it. I was I didn't know anyone there. My girlfriend was back. Anna was back in London, and I was like by myself. And I didn't know anyone, and having people to talk to, surgery makes you really emotional. All the anesthesia, and this guy next to me shared his cookies with me, and at one point everyone's got their IVs and they're rolling and walking slowly. I'm like, where's everybody going? And he's like, EastEnders. I'm like, what the fuck is EastEnders? And it's the longest running soap opera in England, and literally the room cleared out. Everybody went to the TV lounge for EastEnders. So I got surgery, and I still have a scar from it, although my hair is probably too grown for you to see it. Should have got my hair cut right before I did it. I have a scar like this where they had to go in, roll down, pop out my cheekbone. So then, the next day, they held me for a day. Next day, and I found a place in that one day where I did all that stuff. I forgot that was the coup de grace, really, was that at the student union, I saw a thing for housing, and it was actually luckily close to the hospital, and tore a tag, met them, took care of everything. So when I got out, in fact, one of my new roommates met me at the hospital, because I was a little groggy and banged up. So I had found this place to live even in that one day where I was just Olympic adulting. And one of my roommates met me, and I went to my new house. Eventually I went and got all my stuff from the YMCA, but I went home and slept it off. Now, the surgery went great, that was fine, but I'd been pumped full of morphine, and having just come off of methadone, 2 milligrams the day before in America, and then I get to England, 0. And I always tell everybody, it's with substance abuse, going from a lot to a little is not that hard. But going from something to nothing is the challenge. So already there was that. And then I got pumped full of morphine in the surgery and was in pain, and they prescribed me like, I don't know, Ultram or something, some low-level opiate, and I just like ripped through those. And then I was like in withdrawal. Like I already would have been in a mild methadone withdrawal. And methadone withdrawal, by the way, lasts a month. Heroin withdrawal is like a week. Methadone has a really long half-life, which is why they use it as like a maintenance for opiate addiction, because you can take it once a day and it will last you for like an entire day. But as a result of that, the withdrawal is just the worst. It's the worst withdrawal. Now mine was moderate because I'd been coming down slowly, but because I'd been juiced with morphine for the surgery, that intensified it again. And my pupils were just like blown out. When you're on opiates, your pupils get like super tiny, like you can barely see them. And then when you're going through withdrawal, your pupils get like really big. And my pupils were just giant, and I couldn't sleep. I could barely function. And finally, like I gutted it out for like 2 weeks, maybe. I made it 2-3 weeks, and I finally caved and I started using again. I was really anxious and overwhelmed by graduate school. It was like the program, music composition was very based around technology, like being able to run a DAW like Pro Tools or Digital Performer. I'd never had a computer even. My family had like a Commodore Amiga when I was younger, but I never had a computer in college. Everyone else was like fluent in Logic or Digital Performer or Cubase. I wasn't, so I was scrambling trying to get caught up and not sleeping, and I finally caved. And I just was like, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna figure out where to score in this foreign country, you know? So I just wandered around Bristol. It honestly only took me a couple hours maybe, you know? Like when you've done that sort of thing enough, like I had done it on tour a little bit at the end of Fat Mama, it's like you get good at just being able to sort of sniff it out. William Burroughs talks about that in his book Junkie, about how you can just sense when you're in the right neighborhood. So my spidey sense told me where to go, and I started using again, you know, and then almost immediately I was like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm in decent shape, because it actually did make me more functional in the short term. I got sleep, I got caught up in graduate school, and then it was like, fuck, okay, now I'm back to having to deal with this again. So I found a methadone program in England. Dr. Fruin, I remember him saying something weird to me at my first meeting with him. He was like, yeah, you know, in the old days, they would just throw people in a deep pit they couldn't get out of until withdrawal was off. You know, it was like he was sort of threatening me, like he's sort of being like, you know, what we used to do with you guys in the old days. He did not seem very sympathetic, despite that being the part of, you know, the area of medicine that he chose to pursue. He did not seem very, you know, sympathetic to drug addicts with that statement. But I started methadone there. Interesting to note, I have a lot of feelings about the way in this country it seems like they don't want you to stop taking medications like that because the pharmaceutical industry makes money on them. One was everybody in the methadone clinic in America, almost everybody, was like over 100 milligrams. That's like where I ended up starting and tapering down. I didn't know anyone above 60 in England. 60 was like the most anyone was ever on, and that was the most they put me on. It's also green over there. I thought that was an interesting tidbit. It was red in Detroit or in Jackson, but it was green in England. So I started there on 60. I started tapering down, and eventually they're like, hey, you know, I had this really awesome social worker. She was Irish, and she was lovely. And I like at the Victory Clinic, where I was like the star. I was like the star candidate or star client, where like I never, you know, you have to give urine. And at the Victory Clinic, I had to literally pee with a camera, like on my junk, to make sure you're not like swapping out someone else's urine. But in England, they'll like, you know, they send you to a bathroom. They sort of keep an eye on you, but they don't like watch you while you're doing it. But I never gave dirty urine, as they say. So I was like the star client there too. And then one day she goes, hey, you know, you're a good candidate for Subutex. And I was like, what the fuck is Subutex? And she was like, well, it's this kind of new treatment. It's sort of instead of methadone. She was like, she's like, transitioning onto it's a little rough. I got to warn you. Because the way it works is like when you take it, it's like an opiate antagonist. I'm saying that correct, I believe. Which means it'll immediately unbind any other opiates from your receptors. It's buprenorphine. They actually... it existed in America, but they only used it for pain management. But she said, yeah, I think you're a good candidate for it. And I was like, okay. And so I transitioned onto it. And it was rough. 2 days were rough. But I found it to be much better in general. And so every day I'd go to the pharmacy, St. Michael's Hill. I wrote those ladies a little note it was closed the day I went to the airport. So I wrote them a little note and slid it under the door because I really liked the women who worked at the pharmacy on St. Michael's Hill, which I always went to. So I took that, and something else I'd like to point out, which is further evidence in my mind that they don't want you to get off things like this in America, is in England, they have 2 sizes of Subutex, aka buprenorphine, 2 milligrams and 0.4 milligrams. And they do that so you can go, so like let's say you start at like 6 milligrams, then you can step down really gradually by using combinations of the 0.4. And in particular, at the very end when I came down, and similar to me coming down off methadone slowly when I went to England, I came down slowly off of buprenorphine on my way out of England. And so it's like towards the end, it was like 2 milligrams. And then I took 1.6, like 4.4 milligram, then 1.2, then 0.8, then 0.4. And then I even broke 0.4 in half for a few days. And I went really gradually. And honestly, the first day back in Michigan, which was the first day I hadn't taken an opiate or felt bad in years, was so amazing. It was like getting out of prison, is what it felt like. But I woke up in Michigan and I didn't take anything, and I felt like Kevin Kendrick again for the first time in years. In America, they don't do. I have it on good authority. I asked my doctor about it because I was curious. They have Suboxone in America, which is similar, but they only do 8 milligrams and 2 milligrams. They don't do 0.4, so you can't do that gradual step down. And he was like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't feel any withdrawal when you go from 2 milligrams to 0," and that's bullshit. Because when I was in England, they give you like your whole weekend dose, Saturday and Sunday on Friday. And one day, because I got really bad food poisoning, so bad I couldn't get to the pharmacy, I literally didn't have it for the weekend. And I was like 2 milligrams. And I 100% felt it when I didn't take 2 milligrams. So that is bullshit. But in England, they do 0.4. So you can step down gradually because they don't have an interest in keeping you on medications like that, like they do in America, thanks to Big Pharma. So I woke up in Michigan, a free man. Oh shit, I almost forgot. Remember when I looked at the videotape and identified those guys for the police? One of them had like a Penny Hardaway Orlando Magic jersey on. Did I mention that? I forgot all about it. I assumed nothing would come of it. In my experience, this is the only time this ever happened. I mean, in Brooklyn, when my apartment got broken into, this was, a few years later, but the police came and there were still like fingerprints on the window. And I was like, don't you want to like dust for fingerprints? I was like, he left a water bottle. His DNA should be on it. And the guy's like, oh yeah, well, we're going to call David Caruso. And then they had a good laugh. So I didn't expect anything to come of it. I forgot all about it. But all of a sudden, I got a letter in the mail in England. They tracked me down and they mailed this letter, and they asked me they picked up one of the guys on something and they got him to roll over. Some detective was doing his job, got him to roll over on the other guys, and did I want to write a statement and a victim impact statement, you know? And part of me, you know, my initial reaction was like, yeah, you guys don't even know. Like, I got my cheekbone broken and I had to have surgery, which restarted my heroin addiction. I was like, yeah, it had an impact on me. But I also had just so moved on with my life and was in a really good place and I was really happy. And I felt, you know, and on some level I felt bad for those guys. Like I knew that I had opportunities in my life they didn't have. And I just couldn't bring myself to write a letter and try to send someone to prison even longer, especially with how I feel about the prison industrial complex. And, you know, and I had an uncomfortable relationship with the police kind of anyway because of what had happened to me in Colorado. If you haven't watched that video, check that one out. So I just decided to walk away and carry on being Kevin Kendrick.